Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're looking at web automation with Selenium. Looks like someone sent in some notes and code they found on pasted text, all about using Selenium with Java.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it seems like they're interested in, how to make the web work for you kind of a thing.
Yeah, definitely. That's what Selenium is all about, taking those repetitive tasks that we do online and, automating them. And it's not even just about like saving time, which is a big part of it, but it's like unlocking new
Right,
possibilities.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's like having this digital assistant that can handle all the tedious clicks and scrolls for you.
Yeah.
And from what I'm seeing in these notes, it looks like they're particularly interested in using Selenium for testing websites.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Imagine, having to test like every single feature of like a complex website manually every time you make a change.
Right.
That would be such a nightmare and so error prone too.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
So Selenium really lets us automate that whole process. And so we can make sure that, everything on the website is working the way it's supposed to without having to like manually do it every single time.
Right, it's like having a robot QA team, basically.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so jumping into these notes, it looks like it jumps right into setting up the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And we see Maven mentioned quite a bit. So what role does Maven play in all of this?
Yeah. So Maven is essentially a build tool or a project management tool for Java. Um, and it's really helpful because Selenium has, a lot of different pieces and parts. So what Maven does is it goes out and it grabs all of the necessary libraries and files so that everything can work properly together.
So it streamlines the setup process, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to like manually download everything and figure out where to put it. Maven takes care of all of that for you.
Awesome.
Uh,
Okay, and speaking of those necessary files I see in these notes, we have some specific Selenium dependencies highlighted here.
mm.
And there's this line that says org.seleniumhq.selenium, selenium-java 4.8.3, io.github.bonagarcia, WebDriver Manager 5.9.2.
Okay.
And this looks pretty cryptic to me.
Yeah.
What does all that actually mean?
Yeah, so those lines are basically telling Maven, exactly which Selenium components to get and what version.
Okay.
So for example, Selenium Java, that's like the core Selenium library that has all the functionality for, interacting with the web. WebDriver Manager, that one's super helpful because it manages the browser drivers for us. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But basically, it just makes our lives a lot easier.
Okay, so it's like Maven goes to the library and picks out the right book.
Yeah.
Like by title and edition.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So we have Maven setting up the environment, fetching all the right tools, but how do we actually control a web browser using code?
Yeah, so that's where WebDriver comes in. WebDriver is like this core interface in Selenium that acts as like a bridge between your code and like the actual browser that you're using. So think of it like the steering wheel that lets you drive the browser from your code.
So WebDriver is how we communicate with the browser in a language it understands.
Exactly, yeah. Like you can tell it to go to a specific website, you can tell it to click on things, fill out forms, all sorts of stuff.
So it's like we're giving the browser step-by-step instructions.
Exactly. Yeah, and those instructions can be really simple, like just going to a website, or they can get really complex too.
Oh, that's cool. So we're basically teaching a machine to browse the web for us.
Exactly.
But how does Selenium handle the differences between different browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Safari? They all have their own quirks, don't they?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's where browser drivers come in.
Okay.
So browser drivers are these like specialized translators that let Selenium talk to different browsers in the way they need to be talked to. So you have like ChromeDriver for Chrome, Gecko driver for Firefox, and so on.
Yeah.
Each driver is kind of like an adapter that makes sure Selenium's commands are understood by that specific browser.
Okay, so it's like having a universal remote that can control different devices.
Exactly. Yeah, great analogy.
Nice. Okay, and I see we have WebDriver Manager mentioned in the notes again, and this line is highlighted. WebDriverManager.ChromeDriver.setup.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening here?
Yeah, so this is where WebDriver Manager makes our lives super easy. Remember how Maven fetches like all the libraries? Well, WebDriver Manager does the same thing for the browser drivers.
Okay.
So it automatically downloads the right version of the driver for your system, and then it sets it all up so you don't have to like go find it yourself and do all that manually.
Okay, so it's like a butler for browser drivers.
Yes, exactly. It takes care of all of the, the dirty work behind the scenes.
Awesome. So we have Maven setting up our environment, WebDriver Manager handling the drivers, and WebDriver providing the commands to interact with the browser. It feels like we're finally ready to write some code and see this automation in action.
We are. That's where it starts to get really fun.
All right, I'm excited to dive into the code. So there are a few lines highlighted here that look particularly intriguing. This one, for example, WebDriver driver, new Chrome driver.
Okay.
What's going on here?
Yeah, so this line is where the magic really starts to happen. We're creating a new instance of ChromeDriver, which basically means we're launching a new Chrome browser window that's ready to take our instructions.
So this is like hitting the ignition and starting the engine of our automation machine.
Exactly.
I love it.
Okay.
So from here, we can use this driver object to issue commands and make the browser do our bidding.
Exactly.
Okay, let's see some of those commands in action. What kind of instructions can we give this driver to make it dance?
All right, so let's start with a simple one. This line from your notes, driver.get https://www.google.com.
Okay.
That command is telling the browser to go to Google's homepage.
So it's like typing the URL into the address bar, but we're doing it programmatically?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we've automated the process of opening a specific web page just like that.
Exactly. And now imagine when we start stringing together, multiple commands, we can build really complex interactions and really interesting things start to happen.
This is already blowing my mind. And we've only scratched the surface. But before we delve deeper into those more complex interactions, I think it's time to take a step back and consider the bigger picture. What are some real-world scenarios where this kind of web automation can be truly transformative?
That's a great point. We've laid the groundwork, and now it's time to explore how Selenium can be used to tackle real-world challenges. And that's exactly what we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've laid all this groundwork and, we've got Selenium set up. We know how it works with the browser, but now I want to see like the real-world applications. Like how is this useful to me in my day-to-day?
Yeah, totally. So, you mentioned earlier, Selenium is really useful for testing websites. So let's say you're building like a web application, right? Something with user logins, a shopping cart, all those features.
Right.
And every time you make a change to the code,
Yeah.
you want to make sure you didn't break anything.
Of course.
And to manually go through and test every single little thing, every single time you make an update, oh my gosh, it would be such a nightmare.
Right. It'd be so tedious and time-consuming.
Exactly. And especially as your application gets bigger and more complex,
Right.
it just becomes impossible to do it manually. So that's where Selenium comes in, because you can actually write automated tests.
Oh, okay.
So basically, you're teaching Selenium to act like a user would.
Okay.
So you say, okay, Selenium, I want you to go to this website. I want you to click this button. I want you to fill out this form. I want you to, go through this whole process and make sure everything's working properly.
So it's like having a robot QA team, basically.
Exactly. And the best part is you can run these tests automatically. So every time you make a change to your code, you can just run the tests, make sure everything's still working.
Okay.
And if something breaks, you know exactly where to look.
So it just helps catch issues early on.
Yeah, exactly. It just speeds up the whole development process and makes things much more reliable.
That's awesome. So it benefits both the developers and the users?
Totally. Yeah. Developers can, release updates more frequently. Users get a better, more reliable experience.
So speaking of users, when we're talking about web applications, but you also mentioned Selenium being used for web scraping.
Yeah.
And that's something I don't fully understand. Like what is web scraping and how does Selenium play a role in that?
Yeah. So think about all the data that's out there on the internet, Rainer. There's so much information on websites.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's not in a format that's easy for us to actually use.
Right. It's not like a spreadsheet you can download or something.
Exactly. And that's where web scraping comes in.
Okay.
So you can use Selenium to go to a website, target the specific elements on that page that you want, and then extract that data and put it into a format that you can actually work with.
So it's like having a digital librarian that can go out and find the exact information you need and pull it out of those web pages.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it.
That's cool. Okay. So what are some examples? Like, how are people actually using Selenium for web scraping?
Yeah. So like marketers, for example, might use it to track, competitor pricing.
Oh,
Or to analyze customer reviews across different websites. Researchers might use it to, pull data from like scientific journals or government websites.
oh, wow.
Financial analysts could use it to, scrape financial data and build models to try and predict market trends.
The applications seem pretty endless.
Yeah, totally. It's really just about, getting access to that data that's out there and then being able to do something useful with it.
Yeah. Which leads us to another interesting area you mentioned, automating online workflows.
Yeah.
So what is that all about?
Yeah, so think about all the things that you do online that are kind of repetitive and boring.
Well, I do a lot of that.
Right, like logging into multiple accounts, filling out forms, downloading files, copying and pasting stuff between applications.
Ugh, yes, it takes up so much time.
Totally, and that's exactly what we can automate with Selenium.
Oh,
So instead of doing those things manually, you can write scripts that will do them for you.
so Selenium can handle all the boring stuff.
Exactly. So then you can free up your time and focus on the things that actually require, your brain power.
It's like having a virtual assistant.
Right. And honestly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, Selenium is such a powerful tool, and there's so much you can do with it.
Yeah, I'm starting to see that it's a lot more than just like, automating a few clicks here and there.
Totally. Yeah, it's really about, empowering people to take control of their online experience.
So for someone who's maybe feeling a little bit intimidated by all of this, like where did they even begin?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's actually what we'll talk about in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so we've talked about all the cool things Selenium can do, like testing websites and web scraping and automating all those, boring tasks. But now the big question is, where do we even start? It seems like there's a ton of information out there, and it can be pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Like, it's awesome that there are so many resources, but it can be tough to know where to begin.
So where would you recommend someone start their Selenium journey? What are some of those like first steps they should take?
So I always tell people to start with the basics. Don't try to jump into like super complex automation right away.
Yep.
There are tons of great tutorials and online courses out there that can walk you through setting up Selenium, writing some basic scripts, and just getting a feel for how it all works.
So you don't need to be like building AI-powered bots on day one.
Exactly. Yeah, just focus on getting those fundamentals down first. Like, learn the basic commands, how to find elements on a web page, how to, you know, make the browser do simple things like click buttons and stuff. And then once you're comfortable with that, you can start exploring more advanced stuff like web scraping and testing frameworks.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like learning any new skill. You got to
Yeah.
start with the building blocks before you can build a skyscraper.
Yay, exactly.
You also mentioned, community forums and stuff like that earlier.
hmm
How can those be helpful for someone who's just starting out with Selenium?
Oh, yeah, the Selenium community is amazing. Like, people are so helpful and supportive. So don't be afraid to ask questions, share your code and see what other people are doing. You'll find tons of people who have probably already solved the problem you're trying to solve.
So it's like having this global network of mentors, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. And, as you get more experience, you can even start helping other people who are just starting out. It's a great way to, give back to the community and really solidify your own understanding.
That's awesome. I love that collaborative spirit. So it keeps the tech world moving forward.
Totally. And, Selenium itself is constantly evolving. New tools and libraries are being developed all the time, so it's definitely not going anywhere anytime soon.
So it's not just a passing fad.
Nope. It's here to stay. As long as we have websites, we're going to need ways to interact with them programmatically. And Selenium gives us the power to do that, whether it's testing or scraping or automating or just, exploring what's possible.
It's really about giving people the tools to take control of their online experience.
Exactly. Yeah, it's empowering.
That's awesome. Well, I think we've given our listener a fantastic overview of Selenium, from its basic components to its, more advanced applications, and even how to get started.
I hope so. Yeah.
It's clear that Selenium is more than just a tool. It's like a gateway to a whole new world of possibilities on the web.
Yeah, for sure. It's really about unlocking the potential of the web and making it work for you.
So to our listeners out there, I say, what will you automate today? The possibilities are endless, and the power is in your hands. And that brings us to the end of another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep automating.